The subcommittee will come to order. Thank you all for being here at 9:45 a.m. and for the extra arrangements it took to acquire this room and set it up. We want to thank all of our guests, Assistant Secretary James, General Seminiti, Assistant Secretary Petty, and Commissioner Berman. Thank you for being here today. I also want to welcome the Corps Division Commanders. The work you do is of critical importance to our nation, and we all thank you for your patriotic service and for making the effort to be with us. We're just happy to see you here. We are here today to discuss the fiscal year 2020 budget request for the Army Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation. These agencies play a vital role in the management and development of one of our most precious resources, probably the most vital, water. Your agencies have been under pressure over significant flooding, especially high rainfalls and other extreme weather events. You're at the front lines. You see what's happening to our country and to our earth. And I know you make the difficult choices regularly, and we appreciate your leadership. We are pressing for action on the disaster supplemental that passed the House in January, which contains funding for both agencies to address recent hurricanes, wildfires, and other natural disasters, some of which are rather extraordinary. And I'm sure more will be necessary to address the recent flooding in the Midwest. The water resource needs of our country vary from region to region, but all corners of our nation require investments in this essential infrastructure. The Corps and Bureau support critical navigation and irrigation projects that enable farmers and manufacturers to bring their goods to market. Flood control projects protect our citizens, property, and livelihoods. And ecosystem restoration projects protect and restore the environment. And we're still all learning together on how to live in concert with our environment. Unfortunately, the budget request is woefully inadequate to address the challenges before us. It slashes funding for the Corps and Bureau by nearly a third each from 2019 levels. At a time when we should be investing in water infrastructure improvements, this budget moves us in absolutely the wrong direction. Examples, and that's why we're all here. We represent the American people, and we're going to make a difference. Examples of the variability of our country's water infrastructure needs include, in the Great Lakes region, which I'm privileged to represent, extreme rain events that exacerbate nutrient runoff problems and cause massive algal blooms in Lake Erie and other places, threatening fresh water supplies to millions and millions of people. In the West, despite recent above-average rainfall, drought recovery efforts are ongoing and water challenges continue. Many states and territories are still recovering from devastating hurricanes and typhoons. And sadly, right now, Midwest states are experiencing historic flooding caused by snowmelt and increased rainfall, and NOAA is predicting that 25 states are at elevated risk of historic flooding this spring. It is an understatement to say that this request simply does not address these critical needs. There are some bright spots. I was pleased with the inclusion of $75 million for the vital Sioux Lock. This long-awaited update will keep critical cargo moving in the face of an unexpected outage. However, I am disheartened to see that this request yet again does not respond to certain pressing needs of the Great Lakes region. Your budget abdicates responsibility to the people of the Great Lakes region. Asian carp is one of the greatest threats to the multi-billion-dollar Great Lakes fishery, yet your budget provides no funding to move forward on a project to keep the carp out of the lakes. Furthermore, the Corps is an important partner in interagency efforts to control the carp, and this request again slashes that funding. The agencies with us today were created to address the unique water resource challenges across our great country. This must include the need to incorporate resiliency into projects and to address a changing climate that is producing more severe and frequent weather events. However, the administration's budget is simply inadequate to make investments in robust, resilient water infrastructure that we so desperately need. Nevertheless, the subcommittee recognizes and appreciates the importance of your work. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to hearing from you. And I will now turn to our ranking member, Mr. Simpson, for opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairwoman Capter. It's nice to be here in the Ag Room. It's surprising when I look around, there are no real good pictures of potato fields or anything like that, which is the #1 source of fiber in our diets and a good source of potassium, if you want to know. I'm just throwing that out there. I'd like to join you in welcoming our witnesses as well as the Army Corps Division commanders in the audience. We thank each of you for your continued service to our nation. I look forward to today's discussion of the fiscal year 2020 budget requests for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Civil Works Programs and the Department of Interior Central Utah Project and the Bureau of Reclamation. Although I was not surprised, since it happens almost every year, I was still disappointed to see the budget request included large cuts for these programs. The infrastructure investments carried out under these programs are critical to improving our national economy, public health, safety, and the environment. I'm confident that once this committee will work together to provide strong support for these programs. Once again, more concerning than the reduced funding levels, though, are the proposals to do away with the Civil Works program as we know it. In June of 2018, the Office of Management and Budget, one of my favorite places, released a proposal to reorganize the federal government that included elimination of the Civil Works program with the Army Corps of Engineers. The OMB proposed to transfer the navigation mission to the Department of Transportation to be implemented primarily as a grant program with reduced federal funding. The OMB proposed to transfer the remainder of the Civil Works program, including flood control and presumably the emergency response mission, to the Department of Interior. This proposal was flawed on many levels, and though the fiscal year 2019 and through the fiscal year 2019 appropriations process, Congress rejected it on a strong bipartisan bicameral basis. Yet I see some pieces of the fiscal year 2020 budget request that looks like an attempt to start moving toward implementing pieces of OMB's proposals. For instance, the budget overview asserts that the current paradigm for investing in water resource development is not optimal. It goes on to state the budget also recognizes the need to challenge the way future construction investments are funded with less reliance on federal appropriations. The two new programs highlighted seem intended to move the Corps toward becoming a grant-making agency and to allow non-federal sponsors to jump in front of the line for the federal funding by agreeing to funding a large portion of the costs overall or earlier in time than required by law. I do not support either of these goals. I expect to work with Chairwoman and our other colleagues to recognize the importance of the Corps of Engineers to reject OMB's misguided policy and funding proposals yet again. Finally, I'd like to mention that Congresswoman Granger, ranking member of the full committee, had planned to be here today, but due to unexpected events caused her to miss this hearing. I know that she, too, understands and appreciates the good work done by our witnesses and their agencies. I'd like to ask unanimous consent that she be allowed to submit a statement for the record.
Without objection, her remarks will be placed in the record. And
I will have a question on her behalf at the appropriate time. Thank you, Chairwoman Capter, for calling this hearing, and I look forward to the discussion with our witnesses.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simpson, and I'm sure when everyone walked in the room, they noticed the sign out there that said Sustaining Life on Earth. We're in the Agriculture Committee room, but the congressman who chairs this committee now and I have agreed that that's our slogan for both of our committees. So you've got both water, energy, and agriculture here, so we kind of have a symbiotic relationship. And we're pleased to have all of our witnesses here today. First, we will hear from the Honorable R.D. James, Assistant Secretary for the Army for Civil Works. Mr. James serves as the 12th Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil and was a Mississippi River Commissioner for decades before, so he's no stranger to the Corps. Next, Lieutenant General Todd Semonite, Commanding General and Chief of Engineers. Lieutenant General Semonite assumed his current position on May 19, 2016. Prior to this role, General Semonite served in various leadership capacities within the Army, including as Commanding General for Combined Security Transition Command in Afghanistan. Following that, Assistant Secretary Timothy Petty, the Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the Department of Interior. Assistant Secretary Petty served as Deputy Legislative Director for the U.S. Senator James E. Reich of Idaho and Acting Assistant Secretary and Deputy Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the Department of Interior under President George W. Bush. And last but not least, we will have Commissioner Brenda Berman from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. Commissioner Berman is the 23rd Commissioner for the Bureau of Reclamation and the first woman to lead reclamation. America is still becoming. It's an exciting place to be. Thank you all for being here today. Without objection, your written statements will be entered into the record. Please feel free to summarize your remarks in about 5 minutes, each starting with Assistant Secretary James.
Now it is. Sorry about that. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss the fiscal year 2020 budget for the Civil Works Program of the Army Corps of Engineers. I've been on the job for a little over a year, and my goal now is the same as it was the day I was sworn in. Focus on outcomes, not process, in order to get results. Since the beginning of this year, I've had the pleasure to meet with each member of this subcommittee one-on-one to discuss both your concerns and the overall direction of the Corps of Engineers Civil Works Program. The input that you provide is very much appreciated, and I remain committed to working with each of you. I'm pleased to be joined by Lieutenant General Todd Semonite, the 54th Chief of Engineers for the Army Corps of Engineers. I'm grateful for his leadership and the energy he brings. The fiscal year 2020 budget reflects the administration's priorities and provides $4.8 billion for the Army Civil Works Program, with a focus on investments that will yield high economic and environmental returns or address a significant risk to public safety. This budget relies on a foundation of strong relationships between Congress, the Corps, and local communities, which allow us to work together to help manage, develop, restore, and protect water resources. The budget reflects the administration's priorities within the Corps' main mission areas: flood and coastal storm damage reduction, commercial navigation, and aquatic ecosystem restoration. The budget supports a core program that has a diverse set of tools and approaches to working with local communities. Whether this means funding projects with our cost-sharing partners, providing planning assistance and technical expertise to help communities make better informed decisions, or participating in the national and international conversations on how to best address our water resource challenges. The budget helps us maintain and improve our efforts on resiliency and sustainability, one of the challenges associated with the ways we have used our water resources. The budget also focuses on maintaining the vast water resource infrastructure that the Corps owns and manages, and on finding innovative ways to rehabilitate or expand as necessary. I've been watching closely the flooding we have experiencing in the Midwest and the South. As always, the Army Corps of Engineers is working with local communities to protect life and property, and we will be there to help with the recovery. Our citizens along the Missouri River have experienced the wettest conditions from last August until now in 124 years. The folks that live along the lower Mississippi are experiencing a top 2 or 3 all-time flood event. Flooding like this further underscores the importance of investment in critical infrastructure projects. The Corps now has 867, and the General may correct me on this. This is the latest number I have. 867 personnel in the Missouri Valley and the Mississippi Valley deployed, and 453 personnel providing remote support. I will visit these areas on Thursday and Friday of this week. The fiscal year 20 construction program includes a total of $1.3 billion. This includes funding for 9 commercial navigation projects, 5 aquatic ecosystem restoration projects and programs, and 4 flood risk management projects. The construction program uses objective, performance-based guidelines to allocate funding toward the highest performing economic, environmental, and public safety concerns. 4 construction projects are funded to completion in the fiscal Y 2020 budget. They include 3 commercial navigation projects: Charleston Harbor, Monongahela Locks, and Melvin Price Lock and Dam, and 1 aquatic ecosystem restoration project, Mud Mountain Dam in Washington. There are many more details regarding the fiscal year 20 budget than I have submitted for the record as part of my official testimony. Since receiving my appointment to be ASA, I've had one mission: moving dirt. The intention is to start, continue, and finish projects in a more timely and efficient manner to ensure a better return on the taxpayers' investment and to better the lives of Americans. We're working to refine our approaches so that we can optimize funding and allow the United States to appreciate all the benefits the Corps of Engineers has to offer. Under my oversight and direction, and with the help of General Semonite and his team, the Corps of Engineers Civil Works Program is taking bold actions to improve performance and engineer solutions for the nation's toughest challenges. I'm committed to ensuring the Army Corps of Engineers does what they do better than any other organization in the world: design and build infrastructure projects that protect lives, improve commerce, and benefit all Americans. Thank you for having me here today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Secretary James, very much. As you've been speaking, various slides have been coming up on the board there. And I just ask in the future, because we want to help showcase the important work you do, if somehow there could be a legend underneath or explaining where that might be and what it represents, or if you could reference it in your testimony, I think it would help a great deal. We're trying to educate the nation in addition to ourselves. Thank you very much. General Semonite, please begin.
Chairwoman Capter, Ranking Member Simpson, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm glad to be appearing with the Honorable R.D. James as we both continue to work together to address water resource challenges across the nation. I'd also like to take a moment to welcome our division commanders, and I'd like to ask them to all stand up. Every one of these officers is a proven combat veteran with multiple overseas tours. They're proven leaders, and they're absolutely dedicated to the Corps mission. They represent each of the 8 divisions with a Civil Works mission. Thanks. The FY 2020 Civil Works budget is a performance-based budget which will reduce flood risk in communities across the nation, facilitate commercial navigation, restore aquatic ecosystems, and generate low-cost renewable hydropower. The budget uses a targeted approach to invest in our water resources and focuses on high-performing projects and programs within the 3 main water resource missions of the Corps' commercial navigation, flood and storm damage reduction, and aquatic ecosystem restoration missions. The budget includes $4.827 billion in gross discretionary funding for civil works activities, which will benefit the nation's economy, environment, and public safety now and in the future. The FY 2020 budget represents a continuing fiscally prudent investment in the nation's water resources infrastructure and restoration of aquatic ecosystems. Since Congress first authorized our navigation mission in 1824, the Corps has worked hard to develop and implement solutions to our nation's water resource challenges. We are able to do this because we have a world-class workforce of talented and dedicated professionals who are passionate about what we do. None of our work is done alone. We appreciate the value, the support of the administration, the Congress, and all of our partners to succeed in our mission. I am very proud of the work that we do. However, we can and must revolutionize the Corps of Engineers. I've been in command of the Corps for close to 3 years, and I've challenged the enterprise to revolutionize the way we do business. This does not imply that the Corps is not a world-class organization. Rather, it demands that we anticipate and respond to changing requirements and externalities like all world-class organizations. We embrace our authorities and current mission areas as a guide to change how we do business with a strategic vision, taking pioneering steps to remain relevant and ready for the challenges of tomorrow. Successful civil works project delivery supports the current and future infrastructure priorities. The Corps' credibility is measured on our ability to deliver results that are on time, on budget, and of exceptional quality. The Corps is taking bold actions to improve performance and engineer solutions for the nation's toughest challenges. These actions are realized through modernizing the traditional delivery of the annual Civil Works program with innovative tools, streamlining external processes, and exploring alternative financing approaches. The effort to revolutionize the Civil Works program focuses on 3 primary objectives, and they're shown here on the screen: accelerating project delivery, transforming project financing and budgeting, and improving permitting and regulatory reform. The first objective, accelerating project delivery, focuses on innovative ways to deliver high-quality outcomes as a top core priority. Though through looking internally at our organization, we are identifying policy and administrative changes that can increase the efficiency and effectiveness of infrastructure delivery. We believe that risk-informed decision-making should be implemented and documented without being subject to numerous time-consuming reviews. Our second objective is alternative financing. Fiscal responsibility and constraints demand that we utilize innovative approaches and mechanisms which allow for accelerated project execution and earlier realization of benefits, which increases efficiency and effectiveness. Finally, our third objective is to improve our permitting processes. Through Executive Order 13807, we have adopted the one federal decision and are coordinating our processes to comply with NEPA and other environmental laws. Our goal is to simplify the process for gaining infrastructure permits while protecting the environment in accordance with the law. For more than 243 years, the Corps of Engineers has adapted to meet the challenges of the day. Today is no exception. Our current efforts to revolutionize USACE simply represent the next chapter in this remarkable journey. I placed a copy of our Revolutionize brochure in front of you today to reference, and there's over 150 different initiatives that we're doing to change some of the processes to be able to untie our hands and to be able to facilitate execution. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. This concludes my statement, and I look forward to answering any questions you or other members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, General, very much, and thank you for bringing supplementary materials as well as the slides. I think it's fair to say that you and those under your command do great work for our country, but many people in the country are not aware of it. And so we thank you for helping us tell your story. Assistant Secretary Perry, please begin.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Chairwoman Capitor and Ranking Member Simpson and all the subcommittee. It's a great pleasure to be able to be here with you this morning and for the opportunity to discuss with you the President's fiscal year 2020 budget for the Department of Interior and the Bureau of Reclamation, as well as the Central Utah Project Completion Act, also known as CUPCA. I am Tim Petty, the Interior Assistant Secretary for Water and Science, and I greatly appreciate your ability to come and support our programs, including the timely passage of the FY 2019 Appropriations Bill for Reclamation and CUPCA last fall. The overall Department of Interior, first of all, in the 2020 budget request is a total of $12.6 billion in current funding, which supports the administration's economic goals to manage the federal spending. It also reflects our commitment to strike the right balance of protecting yet sustainingly using our natural resources in a manner that provides proper conservation stewardship of our public lands, water, enhances the safety of our communities, increases our energy security, and allows our nation to continue to prosper. This request enables Interior to meet our diverse core missions and continue the progress we are making in advancing the administration's priorities in supporting the nation's economic growth and prosperity. Of course, reliable water supply and energy security are keystones in supporting the economic prosperity of the community in the West. The Bureau of Reclamation's activities include recreation, which support over $62 billion in economic activity with over 450 jobs each year. Reclamation's average annual power outcome is 40 billion kilowatt hours of electricity, providing more than $1 billion in gross power revenues for the federal government. The 2020 budget supports our efforts to address the challenges that impact the availability and reliability of water supply of the United States, of the states, the tribes, the local governments, and other water users that we partner with. Interior's $1.1 billion budget request for reclamation, including a $10 million request for Utah's CUPCA program, invests in our water and power infrastructure, facilitating the delivery of water to 31 million people in the West. In addition, our programs invest in ecosystem protection and restoration so that we can continue to supply water and power reliability as we have historically. This budget also features Interior's commitment to working with Indian tribes toward tribal prosperity. Across Interior, the budget includes a total of $178.6 million for Indian settlement water right commitments, and this includes $132.9 million in reclamation toward fulfilling those responsibilities. Interior is developing and executing a program that will streamline processes and better serve the American people. We are working to reform regulations that are ineffective and obsolete and ensure that we reflect advances in the science and technology of the day. To address water infrastructure challenges in the western U.S., we are working on agreements to partner with other federal agencies and streamline those western water infrastructure regulatory processes and remove unnecessary burdens. This collaboration will help to coordinate regulatory action and drive more efficient decision-making through clear leadership, teamwork, and integrated coordinated review. Finally, Interior's budget request includes resources for the Central Utah Project, which falls under the jurisdiction specifically under my office of the Assistant Secretary for Water and Science. The 2019 budget for this office is $10 million. Of this, the money is available for planning, construction, activity, and administrative work that works with the Central Utah Water Conservation District and continuing our partnerships in that ongoing work. The Central Utah Project annually provides 62,000 acre-feet of water for irrigation and over 100,000 acre-feet for municipal and industrial purposes, supplying nearly 400,000 people in that community of Utah. In keeping with my opening comments brief, I would like to make sure that we get my records submitted into the records here, and thank you again for your support. I'm looking forward to any questions.
Thank you very much, Assistant Secretary Petty. Commissioner Berman, please begin.
Good morning. I won't make that mistake again. Thank you, Chairwoman Kaptur, Ranking Member Simpson, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to discuss with you the President's budget for the Bureau of Reclamation. I'm Brenda Berman. I have served as Commissioner of Reclamation since being confirmed in 2017. Before I begin, I would also like to thank the committee for making the very timely passage of our bill a priority in fiscal year 2019. Having full funding at the beginning of the year makes a profound difference in Reclamation's ability to fulfill our mission with the resources Congress intended for that purpose. Before I started, there's a map of the hydrology of this year in the West. And I wanted to bring this up because what a difference a year makes. Last year when we were looking at this map, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah were all very red. We were having some record-setting drought in those areas. And we managed to eke by with California with an average year, but the rains came late. And so it was very difficult to deliver water last year. And this year, when you take a look across the West, as you heard, there's flooding in some areas, but overwhelmingly, we will be able to deliver water this year. It's a year for reclamation where we can take a breath. And that doesn't happen very often. But what I think it does is it emphasizes that when you're a water manager, you have to deal with what comes to you year by year. And it's infrastructure and partnerships that allows you to make it from a dry year to a wet year and then survive more dry years again. But just thought this would be a good reference.
Could you please explain to those who don't live in the West what this means? Take a look at your precipitation levels, your snowmelt, you see percentages, just very quickly explain.
So unlike many eastern states, in the West, it's year by year whether we have enough water supplies to serve our needs. And what has allowed us to go from year to year is often storage. But when you look across the West here, you can see, for example, the Upper Colorado Basin. We see precipitation and snow levels well above average. That is going to mean that we have above average runoff into Lake Powell this year, which will make a big difference for the Colorado River system. It's one good year out of a 19-year drought on the Colorado River system, but that makes a big difference. In California, you can see California is all blue. That rarely happens. Often the south is dry while the north is wet, or the converse. You can see that our dams and our storage, they say less than 100%, and that's because of flood control. Largely in California, we have been in flood control for over a month. And so we are letting loose water supplies that we cannot capture because we lack either the capacity or the storage ability to do that. That's just an example, and I'd be happy to answer questions later as well.
Thank you.
It's my goal today to testify to the strength and purpose of Reclamation's fiscal year 2020 budget, a budget which continues to address water supply challenges in the West. Our goal remains to ensure water reliability and the efficient generation of energy, to celebrate America's recreational opportunities, and to uphold our commitments to tribal nations and to the environment. The 2020 budget prioritizes these functions and fully supports Reclamation's vital role out West. Our budget emphasizes the following principles. First, water reliability. Reclamation recognizes the importance of maintaining water supplies that can withstand future drought conditions. Moreover, we recognize the importance of securing and modernizing our dams and our water projects, particularly any that rely on aging infrastructure. Second, efficient energy generation. As the nation's second largest producer of hydroelectric power, Reclamation's projects and programs continue to strongly support economic growth and opportunity. The maintenance and modernization of this infrastructure thus remains a high priority for Reclamation as we seek to improve generation efficiency and reliability, as well as cost effectiveness. Third, providing multi-purpose recreation access. Many reclamation projects provide multi-purpose water resource development benefits, including recreation. Fourth is our mission of conservation. Reclamation strives to ensure future water delivery and power generation through the responsible use and conservation of its resources. With that said, I'd like to take a moment to highlight and discuss the challenges Reclamation faces in each of our Western regions, as well as the role of the President's budget in addressing these issues. In the Upper Colorado Basin, the Bureau of Reclamation continues to seek and implement mutually beneficial tribal settlements that avoid expensive and contentious litigation. For fiscal year 2020, we are requesting funding for the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project and the Emmett litigation settlement. In the lower Colorado Basin, home to Hoover Dam and the districts of Representatives Calvert and Kirkpatrick, the priority remains protecting against and mitigating the effects of a 19-year drought on the Colorado River that has significantly diminished water storage in Lake Mead. Over 75% of this region's budget is either paid for directly by our partners or through the sale of hydropower generation. The California Great Basin has suffered from its own unique set of drought-related problems. Good hydrology this year has highlighted the importance of maintaining and improving Reclamation's infrastructure. The region works with a diverse group of stakeholders to implement water management solutions. In the Missouri Basin and Arkansas, Rio Grande, Texas Gulf regions, we continue to collaborate with our stakeholders to manage, develop, and protect resources throughout the area. We are requesting funding for both the Crow and Blackfeet water rights settlements. Further, we're coordinating with numerous local and state entities to improve drought resiliency and better prepare communities for future water needs. Finally, in the Columbia Pacific Northwest region, home to Grand Coulee Dam, one of the largest hydropower facilities in the world, this region is represented by Representatives Kilmer, Newhouse, and Simpson. Our focus here for the coming year is on the Boise River feasibility study. This study is designed to increase storage opportunities at Reclamation's Anderson Ranch and Arrow Rock dams, along with the Corps' Lucky Peak Dam. In closing, Bureau of Reclamation and this administration remain committed to addressing the water and energy needs of the West in an environmentally and economically sound manner for the American people. 2020 promises to be a critical year, and we thank you and thank the committee for inviting us here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman, and to all of our witnesses today. Thank you for your statements, and we will now begin questioning under the normal rules. I will ask one question to give all of our members an opportunity to ask theirs. I'll begin with Secretary James. The administration's budget request emphasizes the leveraging of non-federal funds. As evidence, I would point to two specific projects, a $150 million line item in the request, one for funding what's called Innovative Funding Partnership, and one for funding projects authorized under Section 1043 of the Water Resources Development Act of 2014. It sounds quite innovative, but I have to raise concerns that the administration may be advancing a pay-to-play system where those that can bring funds in excess of their statutory required cost share are being moved to the front of the line for federal funding. This budget request appears to do this to the detriment of those communities and non-federal project sponsors who struggle to meet cost share requirements. This is something that this subcommittee has monitored closely to ensure that the haves are not receiving unfair treatment while the have-nots are left behind. Before I ask you a specific question, Secretary James, I'd like to remind you of Section 1166 of the Water Resource Development Act of 2018. This provision states that the President cannot give preference to local sponsors that utilize provisions for advanced and contributed funds when developing the annual budget submission to Congress. So, Assistant Secretary James, can you please explain the rationale behind these two new items in the President's budget request, and can you assure this subcommittee that the administration's funding decisions aren't being driven by a desire to reward those communities that can afford to pay more than their statutorily required cost share of a project?
Yes, ma'am. I understand your concern about the pay to play. I get that you're concerned about more wealthy communities may be able to advance infrastructure more than less fortunate communities. I get that. The statute that allowed there's a program, I think it's 1043, that actually expires in June by law, that the administration looked at as to try to locate and determine areas that could afford and had the ability to advance a project with funding from the federal government for the federal share. Not for the entire share, only for the federal share, but it is an advance funding. So the community, whatever it may be, the only one we've got under that right now is McCook Reservoir in Illinois, in Chicago. And they had the ability to do the construction, the planning, and wanted to move out with their project. And that's what the 1043 allowed them to do. Now, the other funding, the advanced funding, it comes from the same notion, actually, that there are areas that think they could save money by taking federal funds and applying it to their project, and them doing either the study or the work on those particular projects. And that's what's advancing that from the administration.
Well, can you assure the subcommittee, Mr. Secretary, that the administration's funding decisions aren't being driven by a desire to reward those communities that can afford to pay more than their statutorily required cost share of a project?
I wouldn't describe it as rewarding them. I would describe it as locating the communities that, number one, want to do this, and number two, have the ability to do this. With those fundings, it has to be determined by the Corps that they can do these projects on their own.
Well, we're going to take a very close look at these provisions and to make sure that all citizens of this country are treated equally.
Yes, ma'am, I understand that totally, and if there's any way I can help in that effort, let me know.
Thank you very much. Ranking Member Simpson, please.
Thank you. That was interesting. I know that's a difficult question to answer. Last year, I had an amendment in the committee that said that OMB can't mess around with the Army Corps work plan once it's been developed. I was actually offering it just to make a point. When members from both sides of the aisle came up in the committee and said, don't withdraw this amendment, it passed unanimously by voice vote. Senate adopted it. Of course, OMB goes nuts over that because they want to do exactly what you're talking about. They want to be able to go in and say, hey, we can get this done because this community can raise the funds to do it, so we're going to authorize this plan or this project as opposed to the one you've done. I want the Army Corps to develop a work plan based on the law and quit having OMB mess with it. And if there's one thing that pisses me off that's going on, sorry about that, that's going on right now, it's OMB and what they're doing. And they're doing OMB earmarks is essentially what they're doing. This is not a fault of yours. It's a fault of OMB. So I appreciate the question that Ms. Capter was asking, and I will guarantee you that language will either be in the base bill or it will be an amendment again this year. But I also wanted to say, Ms. Berman, my colleagues here really like to hear you talk about the West going from red to blue. We've got kind of a problem with that. Maybe we need to change colors here. I don't know. But as I mentioned in my opening statement, I'd like to ask a question on behalf of Ranking Member Granger. Secretary James, you have expressed the Army Corps' support for the Central City project to Congressman Granger on several occasions. However, no new federal funds have been included in the Corps' work plan for the past 2 fiscal years. This has obviously raised concern locally about the Army Corps of Engineers' commitment to the project, and this funding issue will eventually delay construction if not addressed. That would put people and property in danger and is simply unacceptable. Secretary James, do you and the Corps remain supportive of the project? Has Congress given you the necessary authorities you need to finish this project, and can tell us when we might expect you to recommend a resumption of the federal funding to support continued construction? And General Semonite, along those same lines, do you believe the Corps has an obligation to complete a project once it's begun? And can the people of Fort Worth, who have already invested so much of their local resources in this project and who depend on the Corps, be assured that the Corps intends to complete this project? Secretary James?
I very strongly support the project, and I'm not sure that the administration doesn't support the project. They're trying to elevate projects based on their priorities, economic return to the nation, et cetera, et cetera. I have talked with Ms. Granger before, intend to again, to see if there are other ways or other authorizations that project needs. At this time, I don't know of any, but it's a good project. There's been misunderstandings about the project.
General Semonite?
Sir, your question on are we committed to finishing things? Absolutely. And most of my frustration in the last 2.5 years is when Congress has given us money to start something, given us the authority to do it, and then we don't finish a project out there. CHICKAMAUGA is a great example of something like that. On this one here, we don't have the funding. If the administration, Secretary James, gives us the green light, we're absolutely committed to ruthlessly continue to be able to complete all these projects and get them done.
Thank you. I'll save the rest of my questions for the next round.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simpson. Mr. Kilmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Assistant Secretary James, I want to start by just saying thank you for meeting with me back in January to talk about my region's priorities. As you know, my district has a lot of core projects, so I value your partnership. And as I said when we met, I appreciate that you haven't put a restraining order out against me or my office since we call so much. During that meeting, we talked about some of the unique challenges that the Seattle District's experiencing in implementing the Regional General Permit 6. And I want to thank you for your commitment to working with NIMS and with the Seattle District to ensure that these issues get resolved. We also talked about the recent biological opinion that was issued for the Howard-Hanson Dam, and that includes a jeopardy decision under the Endangered Species Act, which mandates that the Corps move forward with construction of a critical downstream fish passage facility at the Howard-Hanson Dam. That fish passage facility isn't just critical to meeting your agency's ESA obligations, it's also really important for recovering Chinook salmon that will help with orca recovery, not to mention tribal and recreational and commercial fisheries. And I was really encouraged by our discussion and your apparent commitment to seeing that project move forward. So I was a little surprised and concerned that the budget request doesn't include any funding to begin moving that project forward. And I was hoping you could explain first why that funding wasn't included in the FY20 request, and second, the legal consequences if the Corps that you all face if the facility isn't constructed.
I hope I don't get confused on this, Congressman. There was $93 million allocated through fiscal year 18 with $5.3 million to complete. And as you said, zero in the fiscal year 20 budget. My understanding is that the project was about to exceed the 902 limit, funding limit, cost limit. So the project was halted. Now, the cost limit is $138 million, the way I understand it. And even though the 2019 BIOP directed the Corps to build the fish passage, the funding or override of funding rules in this case. I think that can be worked out. I think there may be some areas of the project could be examined, changed, that would allow the Corps to build under the 902 limit. But that's where we are today.
I guess I just, in follow-up, like to ask your commitment to work with me and the members of this committee to ensure that the Seattle District gets the resources it needs to complete this project, because I think there is not only importance from a fish recovery standpoint, I think the agency's in legal jeopardy if it doesn't get done.
Well, I think that's exactly correct, and you have my commitment, sir, to continue to work on this and work with the Corps to see if not bypass that cost limit, but at least lower the cost somewhat in order to meet the cost limit.
Okay. I wanted to take the remaining time to just recognize and express my gratitude for the Seattle District in particular. I have represent a bunch of coastal communities, and they're struggling with the threats of coastal erosion and sea level rise. We call you into action quite a lot, and you have done an amazing job of shoring up jetties or addressing seawalls that have been breached to really prevent catastrophes. And I want to recognize the value of that. I also recognize it comes with a price tag. And I think we may be missing some opportunities to make some smart investments in resilience upstream rather than waiting for infrastructure to fail and urgently calling you guys to come in and fix it. Either Assistant Secretary James or Lieutenant General Semonite, can you talk about the opportunities you see for the Corps to take a more active role in sort of pre-disaster mitigation efforts? What resources do you need to be able to carry out more of these projects so that we're not calling you after something fails?
Hey, sir, you hit it right on the head. The more we can be preventative, try to anticipate what's going to happen. Sometimes a couple dollars spent up front before a problem can save 100 times that later on. I think the challenge is that because of the constraints in the federal budget, we're putting Band-Aids on things that have to work. I mean, locks and dams and harbors and other kind of things. And so there's less and less money available for some of those things that are more proactive. It's not that we don't want to do it, and wherever we can figure out how to help advise, we want to. But I think that's the challenge that we have on how much we can do proactively. I'll defer back to the Secretary.
I agree 100% on that. You did hit it right on the head, and that's what we're trying to do, but it's very complicated and it's very difficult within the budget limitations.
My time is up, so I yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, and thank you for staying within the time limit. Congressman Calvert.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Assistant Secretary James, General Semonite, thank you for both being here. I think I've talked about this with you guys once or twice before, so I think you know what I'm going to talk about. It's Marietta Creek flood control project. As you know, the project is under construction. We intend to keep moving that project through. We've been working closely with Commander Barta and the LA District to ensure the funding is provided to the Marietta Creek project to continue construction of Phase 2 and Phase 1 environmental vegetation removal. This rain we had, heavy precipitation we had, and underscored how important it is. The current channel was at capacity throughout the February storms, and this was only a 25-year event, not the 100-year event that this project is designed to take care of when it's fully completed. And some of the funds received by the Corps of the project were intended to be used in advance the validation report. I've been frustrated the progress on this draft validation report to date, As you know, we've been pushing the Corps for nearly 6 years to complete the validation report, which will update the project's economics, hydraulics, and hydrology. The local sponsor, the Riverside County Flood Control Water Conservation District, recently met with the Corps to discuss the status and elements of the draft report. The district has now had the opportunity to review the Corps' recently updated economic analysis within the report. It has some serious concerns. For example, the flood district has found instances where certain maintenance costs are double counted or where cost estimates or greatly exceed the actual bids. There's a host of specific corrections, additional identified benefits and cost savings recommendations the Flood Control District is making to the Corps, which would properly incorporate the full range of benefits in the validation report. Secretary General, would you commit to me that you both the Corps leadership will work with the LA District and the local sponsor to address these concerns and incorporate the full range project benefits into the validation report?
Sir, let me go first on that one. We are absolutely committed to getting this done, and that's the theme of what I'm going to say throughout the day here. I've just talked to General Colleton yesterday and today on this. I'm going to ask her to look at this Packer. This is the report we've got to do to get through there. I am not aware of what you talked about on double counting of billing, so I will blow into that this afternoon and have General Colleton, she's right here. I'll have her come back and make sure that they brief your staff. If there's anything that's confusing, we'll make sure that we understand exactly what's out there. I think the main thing is that we certainly see a lot of value in this project. We're absolutely committed to get it done, and if there's anything we can do with respect to the work plan of 2020, if Congress is so inclined to give us money above and beyond the President's budget, then we have the authority to be able to allocate some of that in key places to be able to get some of these projects done.
Well, with that, I had a couple other questions I was going to ask about that, but that's a pretty concise answer. I'll accept that, and look forward to working with you to see if we can get this thing done. I'd like to get it done while I've only been in Congress 27 years. I hope to get it done while I'm still here. Commissioner Berman, I'm intrigued by your map here. Of course,
Yes.
being from California, the panel here hears me talk about California water all the time. We like Idaho because we like looking at their water as it comes down to California where it belongs. On the Colorado system, obviously the Bay Delta right now, we're in pretty good shape as far as our reservoirs. The Colorado system, is there any estimates how much Lake Mead will go up in this so far?
I'm trying to remember the numbers, but as average inflow into Lake Powell, we look at it usually for the kind of springtime runoff. And last year it was at 36%, for example. And this year, as of last Friday, we believe it's going to be at about 133% of average. So a significant flow of water is going to be coming to Lake Powell this year.
I'm going to say something for Las Vegas, because obviously right now they're the most concerned about this. As you know, they're having to do extraordinary things to get water into that area. So this is good news, and gosh, you've only been in office for a little while, and you've already been able to increase the reservoir capacity at Lake Mead.
I'm committed to turning around.
Congratulations, and look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Calvert. I would ask, when you calculate these percentages, how do you relate that to demographics and population growth? Do you just measure water?
So we measure water on a map such as this. So we also have programs. This is through USGS gauging, through working with universities, working with NOAA fisheries, National Weather Service. We use all of our assets and sources and partners to look out at, what is the current hydrology and what is the predicted hydrology? What can we predict in the short term and the long term?
Hydrology, but is that related to demographics in any way?
So what we do have is under the Water Smart program, we have a basin program. And so we've been able to go out and I believe it's over 20 basins at this point, work with local partners and to look at those things. Look at what is future demand going to look like? What is grow out of different cities or footprints. What are the tribal needs? We recently completed a 10 tribes study on what will their future water needs be and what are the sources that are out there. And the idea is that by doing these studies, we can also start looking at the next steps of when you see the gap between supply and demand in the future, how are we going to fill it? Yes. And so that program has helped us work with the different parties about what are the different ideas out there, everything from conservation, infrastructure, new partnerships, exchanges, really trying to look at all of the above of what's right for a particular area.
Mr. Berman, I thank you for that clarity. If there's any way you can provide in a decipherable manner to this committee those futuring estimates by watershed or basin, that would be most interesting, I think, to all of the whole country, really. Are you able to do that yet?
I will work with my team. We have a really amazing team at Reclamation, and we will compile all of those. I know we have them for separate basins. I don't believe we've compiled them yet, but I think that's something we could do for the committee.
Thank you. Supply and demand, very important in this arena. Obviously, Mr. Calvert, Mr. Simpson, these are experts because they live in the area, but for those that don't, this would be most instructive.
Madam Chairman, we're just a small state in California. We just have a lot of needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for being here, everybody. My district, my state, Upper Midwest, has a lot of reliance on the Army Corps of Engineers for a lot of different projects, whether it be helping to site power lines, but really more around some of the flood management issues and around navigation down the Mississippi and the issues that has. You know, it's been a long, cold winter in the Upper Midwest, and now we've got a lot of flooding. I think it was a couple weeks back. I left on a Monday. We had 4 feet snow banks, and I came back on a Thursday, and there was no snow on the ground. It's a lot of melting really fast, and I just saw it this weekend driving around, a lot of flooding. About 280,000 water wells in my state are at risk. Severe impact, property damage, et cetera, from that. When it comes to dredging, I know we've had the conversation, Mr. James, specifically, and the Army Corps comes in every year, and I appreciate that, into the office, but Wisconsin happens to have the perfect shaped sand for fracking. We don't frack, but that fills every train car leaving Wisconsin. But we also have this other thing called agriculture in Wisconsin, and then that can't get on the train cars. And we really need the Mississippi to get product down. We also need to get coal up for power plants. We need to get timber up for paper mills. And we've got all sorts of issues making sure that it's proper dredge and locks are working. So having said all that, I did notice there's about $1 billion in cut in construction. And then this week it was announced that $1 billion is going to be coming to the Army Corps of Engineers to build border wall. And you know, when I look at what we care about in the Upper Midwest, it's not empty parts of the desert having a border wall, but it's making sure that corn and soy and other products are getting down the Mississippi, not just from Wisconsin, but Minnesota, Iowa, and other places. So I was just curious if you could, Lieutenant General Semonite and Mr. James, you know, if you had $1 billion, if there truly is a surplus $1 billion out there, apparently, what would that go towards? What levees and flood walls are next in priority that would be happening, and what dredging and navigation construction projects would be realized if we really had $1 billion surplus?
Sir, I think that the most important thing we have to do is probably work off the backlog. Right now, we have a $98 billion backlog of mainly construction requirements that have not been done. And so what we've got to do, some of these things are just barely hanging alive. We've got $250 billion in the ground. 50% of that is over 50 years old. So as much as I'd love to be able to build new things, we are committed to finishing what we've started, but also go back in on some of these to maintain navigation, and then life safety is absolutely critical. I mean, you know, levees, anywhere people being damaged. So I would put it worst first, and $1 billion would probably just barely scratch the surface of some of the worst challenges we have.
I wouldn't put it exactly that way. Let's address NESP. That's part of what you're talking about, the upper river up there. Right now, we're not getting any funding for NESP. and either out of the budgets or out of the work plans. And for your part of the world, that's a catastrophe, because if one of those locks and dams fail in that part of the world, you're landlocked, you're blocked. And so I hope to see funding for NEST. Right now, I signed a letter for an economic update on NEST to see whether hopefully we can finish a study and start funding NEST. That update won't be out until later this year. But, you know, we've got projects all over this country that people are flooding. We've got locks and dams that are wearing out. We've got ports that aren't being dredged on schedule. So, you know, that's bad enough in itself, but then we've got projects that are not complete. But I do say, on behalf of the administration and anybody else that touches our budget, that this no new start declaration, I can't say it's the right thing, but I can understand the rationale behind it. We've got a lot of things we need to complete, and every time we add a new start, we get further away from completing what we've already got started. And then the other thing, our O&M is exploding. We're spending so much money in this country on O&M, it's ridiculous. And that's due to the fact that our infrastructure is aged. The locks and dams in the Mississippi River were built in the 30s. And they're held together with baling wire and duct tape, basically. And we've got them in other areas as well the same way. We've got flood walls and levees that are getting past their design life. You know, that's what makes my job so difficult is okay, I realize and understand what all we need in this country, and I see it every day. Besides that, I've seen it for 37 or 40 years, what we need in this country, and we just don't have the money to do it all. So there comes to me the importance of doing the right things with what money we have. And there's a lot of people that touch those tent poles. So, sir, I didn't answer anything, I don't guess. I kind of went on.
No, you brought up my next point, too, and I appreciate it. Thank you. I yield back.
Frankly, if we're up to this member alone, I would move these budgets as the first base hit for an infrastructure bill. We're ready. We know what needs to be repaired around the country. And take that message back to the administration. They really ought to consider it. They have some of our members' attention up here. And it would be, you're organized, you're ready to go. And wouldn't that be a great thing for the country? Congressman Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. To this distinguished panel, thank you very much. Mr. James, thank you for personally visiting our office. And General Semonite, thank you, sir, for your service to our nation. And thank you for honoring the men and women who have served us so well in the United States Army and of course, in both capacities, combat and with the Army Corps, sir. I want to personally thank you for actually being on site at Chickamauga Lock with General Toy. That meant an awful lot to actually see the progress. This, candidly, sir, has been probably one of the most arduous projects I have had to work on in Congress. And to the credit of Republicans and Democrats, of senators and members of the House, we actually worked together to reform the Inland Waterway Trust Fund, to properly fund the trust fund, and then to create a priority system. And Chickamauga Lock has clearly benefited from that, the new lock. You've done a great job keeping the old antiquated lock. Mr. James is right. Those old locks are old, and I've been in them when they're dewatered. It's tough, but y'all have done a good job. So thank you. If I may, since we have been providing funding for CHIC and some ongoing projects in the inland waterway system, if efficient funding is provided, sir, until completion, when are we expected to see the new CHICKAMAUGA lock completed, sir?
So, Congressman, if in fact there's efficient annual funding, we would predict December 24. And I would just go on to say that CHICKAMAUGA, for the committee's knowledge, is probably the poster child of how not to build something. If we're efficiently funding, we could have knocked this out in probably 3 or 4 years. What happens is we made a commitment, Congress did, over $300 million, and then it went dormant for 3 years with no money whatsoever. And it sat there as a block of concrete, and it probably lost the trust of a lot of taxpayers saying, why wouldn't we see this thing through? And so what we have to do is to be able to finish these, to be able to make sure we can get that one going. So this is where the committee's ability to give us adequate work plan money allows us to come back in and to be able to continue to be able to get those kind of projects done. And sir, you know, we did 37 million a couple of years ago, 76 million last year, 89 million this year. And our guys are telling us the next logical increment would be about $90 million, 45 federal, 45 inland trust fund, and we could continue to be able to get that done. And that would be the 24 date would mean we'd have to continue to see money coming in.
Thank you, sir. As you're aware, you've seen the flooding all around our great nation, but Chattanooga was particularly hit hard, as was much of East Tennessee, sir. And I noticed that the Coffer Dam apparently was flooded. Can you give me a status update, please, sir, as to where that is?
So we think we got most of the critical equipment out. There was no necessarily damage. It's going to slow us down on time. We don't see any significant impact to the standards of construction or anything else out there. So I think once we know when the water comes back down and we can get back in and make those assessments, if there are some ramifications back, we'll make sure that we get back with your staff and kind of where that's going to work out on time. But I don't see a significant change in the amount of money other than the fact the contractor couldn't work for some time, and then we've got to be able to continue to recaulk that.
Thank you, sir. And lastly, I'd like to gain a better understanding of the Corps' process for the administration of larger construction contracts and how it relates to the dollars appropriated for the current fiscal year. For example, I understand the new CHICKAMAUGA Lock Chamber contract consists of 13 options, sir, with options 4 and 6 and 8 expected to be exercised in the coming months. Can you briefly explain the process for exercising the remaining options, sir?
So you're right. There are 13 different options that have been awarded back in September 13. And then as those work plan monies come available, we try to work our way down through what would be a logical increment. And that's how the options are kind of designed. So therefore, we would say maybe there's a 37 million, then we could exercise that option. And then whatever the funds that are available, we want to certainly be able to bring those in. Now, the options are designed, obviously, in a logical sequence, so we've got to build them in a certain way. But our goal is to be able to make sure that at no point are we leaving money on the table. And whatever money Congress gives us, we want to aggressively get that in the ground. And if there's more specific on the contractual piece, I'm more than willing to have my guys walk you through that in great detail, sir.
Thank you, sir. Let me conclude with the way that I began, sir, with a sincere thank you to each and every one of you all for the work that you're doing and to assure the citizens of East Tennessee that the new CHICKAMAUGA lock is being constructed. It's doing exceedingly well, and I thank you for that. At the same time, where we maintain that antiquated lock, which is still functional. Thank you, sir. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman. Congresswoman Kirkpatrick.
Commissioner Berman, I first want to acknowledge your legislative experience working with our Senator John Kyle, who's well known for being an expert in Western waters. But more importantly, it's rare, but really a pleasure to have a fellow Arizona Wildcat before the committees. So bear down.
Excellent. Bear down. Tough year, but bear down.
Yeah, we're building. We're rebuilding. But, you know, my question, I have to tell you, I was initially alarmed when I saw Lake Mead's percentage of capacity at 42%. Lake Powell at 38%. And I think you addressed Lake Powell. You expect that to come back with a spring runoff. Could you also address what you're expecting with Lake Mead?
So Lake Mead is very much controlled by what is released from Lake Powell. And we make certain projections about that, and we will, as part of our routine in August, we put out a 24-month study that predicts what will happen in the next year. And at that time, we'll determine how much water will flow from Lake Powell down to Lake Mead in the next year. So at this point, I would say there are different predictions out there, but more snow and rain is good for the system. One good year is not going to fix our 19-year drought, but we will take it. So at this point, I would say it is more likely than not that we will not be in shortage in 2020, but we still see that possibility in 2021.
And do the summer monsoons make a difference in those two lakes? Because you said your projections will be made in August. That's probably right about the time the monsoons are at their highest.
So it's a relatively small amount. We absolutely watch the tributaries that come in below Lake Powell and above Lake Powell. So below Lake Powell, as far as Lake Mead, it's a very small percentage, but it can make a difference.
Thank you. My next question is for you, General Semonite. I want to say I really appreciate your commitment to taking care of the backlog. Thank you for that. And I strongly disagree with the President's decision to cut your budget by over 30%. But I also know that this subcommittee cannot provide you the type of resources you'll need to substantially cut down on that backlog of critical authorized projects. That brings me to WIFA, which has helped other federal agencies leverage their money. As you know, Congress authorized the WIFA program for both the Corps and the EPA, but only the EPA has utilized it. In its first year, the EPA used $25 million in appropriate dollars. Excuse me for that insult to the committee. The EPA used $25 million in appropriated dollars and made an astounding $2.3 billion in loans. This subcommittee gave the Corps $6 million last year to prepare the program for loans. General, is your WIFA program ready to process loans in fiscal year 2020 if this subcommittee provides you with the funding?
Ma'am, I think I'm going to let the Secretary hit that first, and then once he answers, then I'll talk about the implementation.
Okay. Mr. Secretary.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. The WIFI alone, we're taking EPA's dashboard, if you will, their methods of doing WIFI loans, because they started before we did, and we're working now on making ours mesh with that so that we can actually start doing the loans. We should have that completed by the third quarter of this year, and then we will be in the position to start actually making WIFIA loans.
And so, ma'am, to build on that, this is where I talked about on Revolutionize. Our second objective there is to look at some innovative financing. It's great to always ask for more money, but we as a nation just can't afford all the bills. So we got to think through what are some better ways to do that. And this is where we are working very closely with the Secretary to make sure that we've got those documents ready and those processes ready. This is something new, so we've got to learn and then be, I think, flexible to understand that as we go through this, keep reevaluating and assessing ourselves on what can we do to do this better. But we are aggressively leaning forward based on the Secretary's direction.
Thank you. I yield back my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Appreciate all of you being here this morning. You're all engaged in something that is very important, the economic well-being of our country, and it's a very important work. So thank you for taking the time to be with us. I do want to acknowledge, I'm sure Congressman Simpson was referring to the quality Washington State potatoes when he was giving a shout out to. I knew it was, and I wanted to thank him for that. So I've got one particular thing I want to talk about. Ms. Berman, it's great to see you again. Thank you for being here. As we've talked about on several occasions, you're aware of the Odessa groundwater replacement project. It's a targeted plan within the Columbia Basin, which is in central Washington in my district. Its goal is to replace depleted groundwater supplies. The sub-area groundwater, it's being withdrawn at a rate that is well beyond the aquifer's capacity to recharge. Aquifers in the sub-area are, as a result, quickly declining. Groundwater is virtually depleted to such an extent that wells are as deep as 2,400 feet today. Water pumped, as you know, from those depths is hot and has dangerously high sodium concentrations. So municipal, agricultural, commercial, industrial, and domestic supplies, as well as the quality levels, are so compromised that this is most certainly and clearly at a crisis level. In 2016, a deep well that supplies a municipal water system in the city of Lind began to fail. Maybe you're familiar with that. The well pumped white foam with high fluoride content at approximately 80 degrees in temperature. Other wells in the area are at the point of drawing air. Irrigation wells near the city of Othello have been recording temperatures as high as 105 degrees and are smelling of sulfur, and y'all know what that smells like. High levels of sodium in groundwater used to irrigate crops are posing a serious threat to agriculture in that area. And the Othello projects it will run out of water potentially in 3 years, the city of Othello itself. So I just want to say thank you and the administration for updating the cost-benefit ratio last spring already. It's been almost a year. So that we can more easily secure the desperately needed resources for the Othello program. And I'm glad to see that your budget justification points to its support for the program. So thank you for that. Though we must be providing much, much more towards this precarious and potentially dire situation. So for the record, do I have your firm commitment that the federal government will ensure that these small farming communities in central Washington are equipped with the resources and support that they need to prevent a potentially catastrophic emergency?
Congressman, we are absolutely committed to bringing surface water supplies to the Odessa region. Our regional director has made it a prime focus of hers. She's been working very closely with the district, with your office, and with others. We have funding this year to move forward in working with the district on design and construction oversight. We'll be working very closely with the district about what the next steps should be.
I appreciate that very much. And I've gone way over my time limit here, but I appreciate that commitment. And this truly is a potential crisis. And I think the last thing that we want to see is another Flint-like situation in this country. And so we have time to address it. And I want to make sure that not only the committee, but the rest of the Congress is aware of that. And I appreciate your commitment. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll yield back.
Congressman Newhouse, if you were to again restate the reason for the situation that you are facing, what has happened from an ecosystem standpoint?
So when the Columbia Basin Project was put into place years ago, there was a commitment at the time until the project was totally completed that areas within the project that were not receiving surface water from the Columbia River could temporarily use well water, groundwater. And that is an aquifer that does not replenish quickly. It's being depleted now over the past almost 50 years of being used. And so we're finding ourselves in like I said, a crisis situation.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Congresswoman Frankel.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for this hearing, and thank you to the Army Corps. I'm sorry I've been in and out. I have other meetings that I've been required to be at. But first of all, I just want to start by saying that the Army Corps has worked very well with my office, and you do really very important work for this country. So thank you for that. So that's why I'm very disappointed that with the budget because of the cuts, but I'm not going to blame you on it because I probably didn't come from you. But I just did want to comment and say that some of the things that concern me are the $1 billion reduction in the construction account, the reduction on Everglades restoration, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, the lack of inclusion of any New Start studies. And I also want to say, and I know I'm here with my colleague Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, who between the two of us are going to try to cover some of the Florida issues. But I wanted to just emphasize that Florida's economy depends a lot on tourism, and which means the proper maintenance of our beaches, our waterways, our harbors, obviously our drinking water. And so a 30% overall decrease in your budget hurts us because we have to have our waterways maintained, and we need to have our beaches nourished, and we have to have our drinking water. So just to tell you that disappoints me. Again, I think it's probably coming from, I said all the budgets have been, there's a request for all the budgets being cut. But just, Madam Chair, to let you know, I'm going to fight strongly, not for this budget. Okay. Let me get to an issue of tremendous importance, a couple of them in Florida. I was once the mayor of the city of West Palm Beach. And there was a time, I believe it was in the 90s. No, I think it was 2000. It was in the 2000. Anyway, we had a terrible drought and came literally within days of losing all our water. I mean, we were terrified. I don't know if anybody remembers that. I see you shaking your head. Not only were we not going to have drinking water, we were not going to have water to put out fires. So that is why there is a great alarm coming from my local authorities, from City of West Palm Beach and from Palm Beach County Commission concerning the talk about lowering the lake levels to 10.5 feet or less in Lake Okeechobee. There's a little bit of a you're shaking your head, you obviously know about it. There's some politics involved, which I really, because what's happening in the Martin County area, parts of East Coast and West Coast, have been getting these algae blooms, which are terrible for them, especially if it has economic consequences. And I know they have been urging the Corps to lower the lake levels. But what I want to ask you about, and to be assured that any decision made is based on scientific evidence and research and not on the politics of who's pressuring you to lower the lake.
So, ma'am, I will guarantee you that we live in a world of science and engineering, and we fight to stay out of the politics. And that is, we are not getting pressure to go to a certain number from internally. There are been some calls from both elected officials and to be able to come to a certain level. We work this under the LORS system. You're probably very aware of it. The normal band is 12.5 to 15.5. And we in the Corps have to live in the world of balance. Last year it was 14.5, and some people have proposed that maybe going into the summer with a higher number could have had some correlation back to the algae. So this year we are coming down. We don't have a target. We're going to continue to look every single day at what's the weather doing, how do we continue to set the conditions. We are lower than we were last year. As of this morning, we were at 12.07. So we're down about 2 feet. We still think, though, and just as you said, there's a bunch of reasons to keep a certain amount of water in there. We've got to take care of the ecosystem. It's water supply. There's some recreation, some navigation. It's not all just about getting the lake as low as possible. So we are going to continue to keep all the elected officials informed as to what we're doing, and there will be no surprises. We are re-looking at lures. We'll continue to be able to advise you on that, but we're trying to figure out, is there a way we can maybe find a sweeter spot going into the summer so we can prevent algae while at the same time preserving water supply?
That's good, because otherwise I was going to request that you have a contingency planned to get water to the city and the county if we ran out. And Madam, well, we can have another round because I didn't get to the Everglades funding, and which I would like to do if my colleague Representative Wasserman-Schultz doesn't get to that. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Wasserman-Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here and for your service. I'm going to ask 2 questions, and then I'm not sure if I'm going to be here in the second round, but the first one focuses on Port Everglades, Mr. Secretary. I think you know that we're going on 20 years that we have been working on trying to dredge our port so that we can accept post-Panamax ships. And I'm thrilled that you're joining me on April 15th to do a tour of the port and spend some time seeing firsthand the vital economic importance of this deepening and widening project. We've discussed the project before, right? You know, last year when you first came into the administration, and I understandably weren't quite as up to speed as you might have been at this point now. But it's time for this project to move into the construction phase. And my understanding is that the Corps is working with the appropriate federal resource agencies to complete the supplemental environmental assessment this calendar year. Can you corroborate that, please? Do you see any hurdles to completing that assessment this year? I know I'm going to be working hard with my colleagues to ensure that this committee, despite the irresponsible decision to not include any funding for New Starts, provides the Corps with appropriate funding for New Starts, because that's the only way that we can actually move into the construction phase of this project. So why does the budget not include any money for New Starts? And it's not a good enough answer that we have too many other projects pending and that are taking too long to not add others. That just means that we're going to have a backlog that exists, and we're going to create more of a backlog. And what would be the next step for the project upon completion of the environmental work? And if you could save time in your answer for me to ask you about my Everglades question, I'd appreciate it. And General Semonite or Secretary James or both of you.
I'll give you a quick answer, ma'am. There's 3 things we're working right now. We're working on the NEPA report. We've also got to have the ESA report, and then we need the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. All those are working, and we need 3 permits. They'll come in. The design is being done right now, so that should be done somewhere towards next year. We are setting the conditions, so all we really need is funding. Now, to be honest with you, though, this is a heavy lift because of the benefit-cost ratio. So that's where the committee is going to have to figure out how to work through that. You're at 1.29, and the normal metric for OMB metric is about 2.5. So I'm saying if the Congress gives us the authority to build, we're ready to build, but this is going to be a challenge when it comes to the funding level.
Okay, you're going to have to come back and come to my office.
We certainly will do that.
Talking about to me, because I was not aware that we had a ratio issue. So is the answer yes, that the environmental assessment is going to be completed this year?
2020, all of those permits should be done by those different federal agencies next year.
So how do we get into the construction phase if the assessment isn't going to be done?
So we're going to need the New Start, and we're going to need the funding allocation.
Okay.
And we'll lay that out for you, ma'am. General Holland's here.
We have to have that happen in 20. That has to happen. We cannot go another fiscal year without this beginning. So we have to begin moving the Coast Guard station.
Yes, ma'am. So we'll work with the Secretary. That means that this will have to then compete in the FY20 work plan for both the New Start and the funding.
Yes, exactly. Okay. And quickly, with the Everglades, the EAA, the Everglades Agricultural Area Reservoir, that component of SERP, the Central Everglades Planning Project that was authorized in the last WRDA. It's a project that will store and clean and deliver badly needed water to Everglades National Park and Florida Bay. I know certain work has to be done for this before this reservoir can move forward. I hope you're working with the South Florida Water Management District in order to identify the steps that have to be taken to move EAA reservoir to construction in a timely and expeditious manner. So what are the specific studies or other steps that must happen to prepare the reservoir for actual construction? Can some of those steps be taken concurrently? And could you give an estimate of the time it will take to move to construction of the EAA reservoir? Because that would be an example of a project that is taking entirely too long to move forward.
So, ma'am, this is mainly in the design challenges. This is a massive reservoir, probably one of the biggest ones ever built in the United States. It's 1/4 the size of Washington, D.C., 78 billion gallons. This is about 30 feet high with 20 feet of water. So although the concept was done by South Florida Water Management District, the design is not. So that's where we got to sit down and figure out, how do we make sure we build this reservoir so it doesn't have life safety challenges as well. We're working through all of that. I'm not even worried about the funding right now. The main challenge is get the design done, set the conditions, so then when funding is available, we can do it. I don't have a timeline right here, but I've got it in a book, but I'll certainly come back and lay you out on what's the road to the path forward and what are the obstacles along that path.
Okay, that would be incredibly helpful. And then lastly, with my last, well, I have no more time, but when Congresswoman Frankel addresses the paltry, unacceptable $63 million request in the President's budget for Everglades restoration, I will associate myself with her remarks. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman, very much. I was reflecting as I was listening to the questions by our members about the diversity of our membership from each region of the country and some of the unique challenges they face. I certainly face those in my region. And because we have so many division commanders here today, thank you for your service. I think one thing that would benefit this subcommittee and perhaps others would be to take a topic like water, fresh water, for human consumption and agriculture, and take a look at that in a comprehensible way for the country. What tends to happen in this subcommittee, and I love this subcommittee, but we do talk about projects, this project, that project, this dam, that lock, whatever, and they're all important. But what gets lost is we talk about the particular, but we don't generalize. I thank Commissioner Berman for the start of some information regarding a region of the country. But I think for the sake of the nation, it would be very beneficial, and I may be the only person that attends, but if you could take your collective wisdom and help the country understand what it needs to do to prepare for the future. Your budgets fit into that bigger picture. And I think we need to be more effective in communicating with the public. That's hard for you because you all have pieces of the puzzle. I also think we need to relate our work to the demand issue for water. Now, the community I represent is 1/435th of the puzzle, and its water was shut off half a decade ago for 3 days because of toxic algal blooms coming into the water system. We're not part of the Bureau, but you need to understand our pain. Flint, Michigan has not been able to completely recover from the disaster that it faced. Until this morning, I was unaware of Mr. Newhouse's situation. But there are things happening across the country where we need to muscle up faster to meet the environmental challenges that future generations will face. And I don't think we completely can articulate it because we are focused on projects as opposed to the larger environment in which those projects exist. So I would ask the district commanders, think about how you could help General Semonite to communicate with us in a way where we could share it with all of our other colleagues. Maps that really help us see the truth, whatever that environmental truth is now, and what we have to do to use our resources, particularly related to water, to transition better to the future. According to a recent United Nations report, Climate change is already causing water shortages in many places. What evidence do we have of that here? There are increased incidences of flooding that threaten drinking water and wastewater facilities across the globe. I can tell you in my own area, the amount of rain coming into the Great Lakes region is at historic levels. And one of the things that's happening is that Lake Erie, the southernmost of the Great Lakes, has been full of these algal blooms, but one of the related issues is that over 40% of the septic tanks in the region have breached. That's not your job, right? Septic tanks, that's the state's job, but they're not doing their job. And those septic tanks have been flushed out underneath the top layer of the soil, and that's helping to contribute to some of the issues that we're facing in that freshwater lake on which millions of people in the United States and Canada depend for their fresh water. I don't know how we better communicate this. Whether we get National Geographic magazine to sit down with us here and to kind of take the information you have and to generalize from the specific, but I really feel a need to do that at the beginning of this 21st century for the American people. We have massive washout of agricultural lands in our very flat region of the country. Other places are water short. California's fighting about water all the time. I've not been a part of those battles, but Congressman Calvert is an expert in that. We have drought impacting other places in the country, and Commissioner Berman, you talked very eloquently about, measurements, but most people I represent, if I showed them this, it would mean nothing to them. As good as it is, it isn't in language people can understand. So I'm saying to each of you, in order to meet these new challenges more forcefully, could you clarify a little bit what your agencies might do to help us better present the big picture to the American people to address the challenges that climate change certainly are creating in our country and around the world? And what are your agencies considering to better explain to the American people why a specific project fits a bigger picture and why it's necessary, and how we make those investments to be more resilient and robust? You must be debating this inside of the various regions that you represent, but somehow, how can we better communicate it? I just sense that we're divided up into 435 pieces, and then within those 435 pieces into specific projects, and we're kind of losing the big picture. The recent flooding in Missouri, Iowa, and Nebraska, to me, I looked at that and I thought, how do we explain this to the American people? More than a flyover by the Vice President, but what does it mean? What's happening in that part of the country? How can we explain it? So I guess I'm sort of begging you to help me figure out what assets do you have that could help us grapple with the changes? And every member has got some little footprint in their area of this change, but it's not generalized from the specific. Do you have that ability, General, in your purview? Or, Mr. Secretary, do you have it in your purview to help us generalize from the specific?
I think, ma'am, we might not necessarily have answers, but we certainly have enough data and enough understanding of the problems. The challenge, I think, is that this is not a given project or a given federal requirement. It's about 8. So how do you balance things like water supply, water quality, irrigation, flood control, recreation, navigation, all those different things. And that's the challenge, and you're exactly right. So many times we get so focused on a parochial interest that maybe only deals with one of those, but I think we as a nation have to look at integrated water management. How do we put all those on the table and then figure out how are they affected by things like climate change, sea level rise, urbanization, and then how can we anticipate the future requirements so we can then help shape what we need to do in the years out there. Things like how do we get more water supply perhaps, because we know eventually water is going to be more and more important. So I think these are some of the things that we've got to have this dialogue on. And it's not just the Corps, it's working with all the other federal agencies because we all have a role in this, and the international community has got a lot of thought on this. So I think we need to take the discussion to a higher level.
I agree with you, General, and you have a convening authority. The Secretary has a convening authority other agencies do not have. Mr. Secretary?
Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to explain quickly. He went through several uses for water, which is true. All of them are. But one that really concerns me at this point is that water supply is becoming more needed across this country yearly, daily. And when we decide that there's this beautiful flood control reservoir, and we decide to contract more and more for water supply, that sounds good. Well, you're taking water out of the flood control reservoir. Well, when you make a contract for water supply, you have to guarantee the water is going to be there, or you try to guarantee it. I don't think there is a guarantee. But the thing of it is that water supply water takes up room in that flood control reservoir. So that reservoir can hold less flood water than it could without any water supply. Those are the kind of things the General's talking about. They're going to be vicious. And you're exactly right, ma'am. They need to be addressed now. Because out west, I was out there last fall sometime. Gosh, Mr. Calvert's, Congressman Calvert's left, but I was out there last fall in the Columbia area and systems, and they basically have the same problem. It's just more exacerbated by the droughts they've had. Water supply is a big deal. No, by the same way, so is flood control. The same areas that need water also need to be protected when the snow and the rains come and flood their cities. And that's the way it is all over this country. There's going to have to be a real discussion about water supply and bring in all the variables to figure out what it has to be.
Help me find the 3 brightest people in this country who think about that.
I can't volunteer, but you can draft me.
I would take both your recommendations. The committee would welcome that, on how to generalize from the specific to help the country, you know, because the mayors care about what we do, our governors care about what we do, but we have to present a more clear picture to the American people, in my opinion. Did you wish to comment from the Bureau's standpoint, Dr. Perry?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, just
Petty?
a quick comment on that, which is that as different agencies within this administration as well have actually tried to make an effort and are working to get together at Assistant Secretary James's level, my level, EPA, USDA, Department of Energy, and others that deal with water, because we all have, getting on that level of what you're asking about, of coming together and really talking literally on a monthly basis at least with each other on these bigger areas that we need to discuss in these topics that you were just discussing. So we actually look forward to maybe sometime in the future getting time with you to discuss what are really those big picture priorities that really play into not only projects but regional areas, and how even technology and the science is really benefiting that. And we're coming into this kind of new age of really understanding how to incorporate these different discussions in a big picture. So I'll stop there, but looking forward to having some more interaction with the thoughts that you're having as well.
Congressman Newhouse.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Simpson, for deferring to me first. And first of all, let me just say, Ms. Capter, I thank you for paying attention to what I was talking about with the Odessa sub-area, and I look forward to working with you and your staff on trying to prevent a crisis from happening while we still have time to do so. So thank you for that. I like the way this conversation is going as well. My question I had wanted to direct to Dr. Petty had to do with the Columbia River Treaty. And there's a lot of things my constituents are concerned about, but I got to tell you that this is one thing that I get questioned about all the time. And it's a lot to do with what exactly James was talking about, the balance of flood control versus other needs. And to complicate it more, we have another country involved in this. The Canadian river system is integral to how we manage the Columbia River. So I guess I've got a few ideas I'd like to share with you, but I'd just like to welcome, I'd ask for you to share with me some of your ideas on the topic of the Columbia River system. I know that, the Columbia River Treaty negotiations. I know that ongoing negotiations are happening. We're getting to a point where we're getting more than just general reports. There's some details starting to emerge. I know Ms. Schmale, I always butcher her name, is that?
Nope, that's correct.
Schmale. She's going to be holding another round of town halls soon to speak with people in my district, particularly in the Tri-Cities area, which is an opportunity for them, and we greatly appreciate that. But I just wanted to give you an opportunity to speak a bit about the Columbia River Treaty, the progress that's being made, because like I said, this is an area of huge importance to the Pacific Northwest and tremendous interest.
Well, Congressman, I greatly appreciate having that opportunity. And first of all, I want to be able to come up and actually spend some time with you and bring the negotiator from State Department, Jill Smale, so you're saying it correctly.
I've met her before, actually,
yes.
and I still can't pronounce it.
She is working constantly on this, and she has a high commitment to the staff. We actually just came up just recently and met with both House and Senate staff and gave an update that is going on there. But there's a real commitment this spring to meet with all the different members of the Pacific Northwest on this topic. They are specifically in negotiations, and but we want to be able to individually talk to you about kind of where we're at with the negotiator. I am specifically the designee for the Department of Interior by the Secretary to be part of her technical advisory with Reclamation on these balances. So it's a balance of with water demand and how to use it with Reclamation. At the same time, it's the demand for the U.S. Army Corps of saying we need to move this water out of the system because we have more water coming in. And so with that, the area that I really would love for us to be able to sit down, talk about where the technical areas are in the discussions of flood control, of hydropower, of ecosystems, as well as those areas of working, obviously, with the Canadians. And there's good dialogue going on, and being able to give you more details, I think, individually, I think will be a huge help with the negotiator, because my job is to make sure she has all of the technical and knowledgeable information, which both General Spellman behind me and his team out of the Pacific Northwest is right there with them in these discussions, and we'd be happy to bring you even more up to speed on that just because of time.
Yep, I appreciate that.
Great.
Look forward to it.
Yeah, great.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. Simpson. I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman Frankel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you again for being here. So I want to start by just adopting by reference a lot of the comments of my colleague, Representative Wasserman Schultz. Again, I think I commented on the disappointment of you not having any money for new starts, and we have been trying to dredge Port Everglades. It's been, I think she said 20 years. It's maybe 20 years we waited to even get an authorization. So just in terms of the economic prosperity of South Florida and even all Florida, I'm hoping that we'll be able to accomplish that with a new start for Port Everglades. And I also want to just agree with her on the need for to move forward on the reservoir project in South Florida. I want to talk a little bit about Everglades, not Port Everglades, which is a port, which we just commented, but Everglades, which is for Florida is the drinking water for about 8 million Floridians and visitors, and very important for our economic vibrancy as well as our environmental vibrancy. And there's been a longstanding agreement between the federal government and the state to put a certain amount of funds in to accomplish several projects, which I know you're fully aware of, which have been underway. The Florida, and this has been a very bipartisan effort. Thank goodness there's something bipartisan in this Congress, but Republicans and Democrats are really very together on our support for Everglades restoration. Our delegation, the Florida delegation, as well as I know our governor's office, are requesting $200 million for the Everglades restoration project. Your budget puts in $63 million. So my question to you is how the discrepancy in this funding would, or would it author any delay in getting completed the projects that have already been authorized? Or how would it affect getting those projects completed? Someone going to answer that?
I'm thinking.
It will, okay. So, okay, you're thinking. So maybe I'm trying to be diplomatic for you. So it would affect, time I had to put it this way, it would affect the completion, the speed of the completion. Let's put it that way.
Yes, it would.
It would, okay.
It
All right,
would.
so thank you for your honesty and for your good work. And with that, I would just like to say to our chair and to my colleagues that that we are going to urge, I know those of us in Florida, is this $200 million request be put into our budget because of the importance of the restoration. And you would, I see you shaking your head, you would agree it is a very important project.
Well, it is an important project. It's an important project to the administration. I understand the president's going down there Friday. So, I mean, like you said, bipartisan, yes, probably it is a bipartisan, but it's, I have a modest home in Palm Beach Gardens and have had since 1979. So I probably don't know as much about the area as you do, but almost.
But you do drink the water, and right, I'm assuming.
I won't answer that.
Okay. Anyway, listen, thank you so much for your time. I'm sorry, Madam Chair, that I've been in and out, but I do appreciate it, and I yield back to you.
Thank you very much. Ranking Member Simpson.
Thank you. Interesting to listen to the chairwoman's discussion on the global aspect, or at least nationwide aspect of a lot of this. And it is kind of interesting. There are 435 different districts, and we all do have our parochial interests and stuff. The one thing that I always found interesting when I became chairman, and sometimes it's hard to explain this to your constituents, I care every bit as much about Lake Okeechobee and what's happening in Florida as the members from Florida. I care every bit as much about what's happening in Dallas-Fort Worth as Ranking Member Granger. I care every bit as much as what's happening with carp, the Asian carp in the Mississippi, as the chairwoman and members from the delegation. You have to do that as chairman of the committee. You have to expand your view of just not your local interests, but the interest of the nation and what's best in the nation. And frankly, that's what the Army Corps of Engineers work plan is supposed to do. And that's why I am so opposed to anybody messing with it once it's been determined by the law and our appropriation level. And I'll continue to fight that fight. And if you want to have a fight with OMB, I'm on your side. Couple of interesting, a couple of questions that I need answered. One, last October, the President issued an executive order promoting the reliable supply of delivery of water in the West. Commissioner Berman and Dr. Petty, how has this executive order helped you implement your programs, and what is the status of your efforts to implement this executive order?
Yeah, Ranking Member Simpson, thank you for the question. Actually, I have in my hands the memorandum that the President signed, and specifically with the Pacific Northwest. Section 6 is 2 sentences. And part of those 2 sentences is the idea that there would be one federal lead. And working with that has really been able to allow, we've always been able to work together, But what we've been able to do with the Columbia River and the biological opinion, which is specifically in that memorandum, is the ability to say, amongst yourselves, choose someone who will actually be the lead, take work and responsibility, and let's move this ahead and let's get it done. We're in round 4 of the biological opinion. We've been doing this for a long time. There's a lot of things that we've learned, we continue to learn, and we're going to learn into the future on how really to work with that river. But the whole idea in that aspect of the Pacific Northwest, in those 2 sentences, was to say, let's work together. We made the Corps of Engineers the lead. I think they have a fantastic lead. Everyone was in agreement of who that lead was going to be. And now we work with them side by side to say, let's get this done. Let's get this done in a good manner, that we put all of our ideas and thoughts together so that we can have an outcome, but that outcome is going to continue to develop. Once I think probably we'd all agree, is once we get this one biological opinion done, that doesn't mean that we're done. It's going to continue. We have that ability for science and technology to continue to develop and to work with those communities and states side by side on what we're trying to accomplish. So, Commissioner or even Assistant Secretary, I'm sure they can add some more thoughts into that.
Go ahead, ma'am.
I just want to say the presidential memo from October, I found so exciting because it put a focus on water supply. It said we are looking at water supply reliability in the West. And when I looked back in the history, and I'm sure I could have missed something, but I think John F. Kennedy was the last president who did that. So while the memorandum does name specific projects in California, Oregon, and the Columbia Snake River system, it also talks about using our best technology, using our ability to forecast, working with the Army Corps of Engineers, with NOAA, with other departments. But it is putting a focus on making water supply reliable. And that is what Reclamation does. That's what we're charged with doing. And so we've seen it just very exciting as a way to really hone down to how are we going to get projects done, how are we going to move forward with our environmental compliance, how are we going to make sure that water is becoming more reliable.
Thank you. Secretary James, your agency is required to submit various reports to the status of executing appropriated funds. The committee needs those reports to carry out effective oversight. I think we've had this discussion in this committee for as long as I've sat on it, which is about 18 years. Yet many of the reports are long overdue, including some that have not been submitted since fiscal year 2015. What steps are you doing to make sure that we get these timely submission of these reports? Because oftentimes they're necessary for us to make an assessment when we're doing an appropriation. And I guess I'll just ask you, do we require too many reports? Seems like every time we do something, we say, make a report, every year like this, and then that goes on forever.
I wouldn't say too many. I'd like to get with you to pick out the ones we could eliminate. The ones you're talking about now, yes, we are behind. I discovered that about 3 months ago. Didn't know it before then, and we're going to work hard to get those caught up to you, just as best we can, as fast as we can.
If I could, Chairwoman, Secretary James, the budget request proposes to move the formerly utilized sites remedial action program, or FUSRAP, from the Corps of Engineers back to DOE. And I would remind you that Congress moved FUSRAP from DOE to the Army Corps of Engineers because we weren't happy with what DOE was doing. Can you please explain the reasoning behind the budget proposal to move the program back to DOE? What guarantee would you have that DOE would implement the program better than in the past? And what would be the roles and responsibility of the two agencies under this proposal? And since DOE really doesn't do cleanup, they hire contracts to do cleanup. Are we going to put the program under them and then them hire you to do what you're doing now? And is that more effective?
Yes, and I don't know.
Okay.
Yes, we're going to do that. Time will tell whether it's more effective. I think the original thought was we might actually get more funding that way than we're being allowed for funding on fuse wrap. The other thing, I really think that DOE wanted that program back. I can't answer why on that.
I just find it very bizarre when I haven't had any complaints about the program that's being run now, how the Army Corps of Engineers is running. You know, my dad said when something isn't broken, don't try to fix it.
Yes, sir.
And so I have some concerns, and I guess along that same line, this whole budget proposal, General Seminite, and you know, the Corps implements the Columbia River Fish Mitigation Program. The Pacific Northwest ratepayers, including my constituents in Idaho, reimburse a substantial portion of this funding through the Bonneville Power Administration. Are you working to make sure that the BPA, working with the BPA to make sure that the BPA ratepayers are getting the best value for the projects and activities under this program? And for the hearing record, please provide a list of the proposed projects and activities to be funded under the program for fiscal year 2020, their budget request, and please include the estimated cost and mitigation benefits for each.
Congressman, we'll certainly get those projects to you. I don't think I have that list here, but on the other hand, we certainly work very, very closely with BPA. I am not convinced that it is one of our mandates to be able to make sure that the ratepayers are necessarily getting the right rate. I think we stay in the engineering lane of technical advice, and I would let BPA probably make that assessment. Whatever we can do to be able to facilitate a good value to the taxpayers, we certainly want to do that.
Thank you. And I guess one last question. As I said in my opening statement, and this is what I was getting to, the OMB reorganizational proposal includes transferring Corps mission areas to multiple other federal agencies. The Corps doesn't just build single-purpose projects. The Corps also manages entire river systems for multiple purposes. Can you explain to me, or do you think it would be more challenging for multiple agencies to be responsible for various missions within a river system? And can you please describe the kind of expertise the Corps brings to its water management responsibilities?
I can't tell you about all of the areas that Corps has to handle, but I can tell you that flood control and navigation has to be under one agency. The structures in a river for navigation also contribute to the ability of that same river to have flood control, like levees, revetment, dikes. Training of the river channel itself for navigation helps pass floods. So the bottom line is navigation and flood control has to be under the authority of one agency, in my opinion.
Ranking Member Simpson, this is a system. I talked about the 8 different parts of the system. Congress has authorized some projects to have all 8. Other projects might only have 4 or 5 of those authorized purposes. It is our job to be able to be the balancer of those 8, and we're accountable. And so while it might be impossible to optimize all 8 variables, some do compete against each other. As the Secretary said, flood control could very easily be at odds with water supply. But we owe it to you to be able to be that honest broker to come forward and say, give us what your authorities and what you want us to do, and then we're going to be absolutely passionate about giving you the best option and the best solution within those 8 variables. I think if you were to fragment those functions into different agencies, we have a hard enough time synchronizing now among state, local, federal, and if you take something that's going relatively well and break it apart, I would just think we would have a lot more challenges. That's my personal assessment, though.
Thank you. I do have one more. Your brochure that you gave us here, the picture on the front of it is the Army Corps Civil Works leaders visit Folsom Dam joint federal project, and then it says, by partnering with the Bureau of Reclamation, completed the project faster and more cost effectively. Could you guys explain to me what you did to do this, to partner together, what required it, or did you just decide this was a good idea, or what? I mean, because I'm impressed by that. I'd like to see more of it.
Yeah, and we have a briefing on this that I think we really want to come and lay it out for you, but we started out with probably a relatively risk-adverse process to be able to make sure that we could get this done exactly the right way, but it would take a lot longer. I think we ended up saying, how can we do some things concurrently versus sequentially? And as a result, we shaved millions of dollars off, and we also ended up taking probably 2 years off the overall completion. So it goes back to how can we maybe do things a little different than we've been doing them for 243 years and find a better value? Because at the end of the day, the taxpayers certainly appreciate it. Now, I would defer to Bonneville if there's another opinion as well.
Let me just give a little bit. Both the commissioner and I were deputies when they really started this back in the early 2000s. And I think it had a lot to do with the leadership of both U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Department of Interior, and the commissioner that said, let's get this done. And it was, we see our part, we see your part. It became a very effective group, and we got things done under, faster than we said we would and under budget. And it worked really well. For the community in that state, that was also the big partners, it was everyone coming together and basically saying, let's do some good and let's get this done. And it was a very, very successful project that I think we could replicate that into future projects as well.
Thank you all. I'd like to see more of this. And this is what we expect. So I appreciate it. And I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank your division commanders for being here. You do incredibly important work for this country, for our economy, for safety, for protection of property and other things. And thank you for what you do.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. I wanted to put a couple of your associates on the spot, General. If either yourself or someone you wish to call up from the divisions, if you were to explain to the American people what just happened in Missouri, Nebraska, Iowa, and the what is likely to happen down the road here over the next several weeks with the flooding, how would you explain that to the American people? Is there someone you could bring to the table, or do you want to discuss that, General?
Ma'am, this is a great opportunity for professional development of a general officer, so I'm going to bring Rick Kaiser up.
All right.
Rick is our most senior division commander, and he is actually the president of the Mississippi River Commission. So whatever comes out of Lakes and Rivers with General Toy or General Helminger coming down to Missouri, Rick's the guy that's going to receive that. So Rick, keep it kind of short, but why don't you go ahead and step right here.
And I'd be interested in their professional opinion as you watch the reporting on television about what's happened. How good do you think it is? How does it explain to the American people what's going on out there?
Well, Congresswoman, it's good to see you again. I was the Lakes and Rivers Commander, and we talked multiple times about the Maumee River.
Thank you.
First, I would explain in a simplistic way, what you have in the Mississippi Valley Division is a system called the Mississippi River and Tributaries Program, which was put together after the Great Flood of 1927. That system simply does not exist elsewhere in the country. The MR&T system, and you heard the Secretary say, we have passed a number 2 or number 3 level flood, and you haven't heard much about it, because it was designed properly to take the waters that will inundate that part of the country. So you don't have that out, in the western portions. So what you're seeing there is a record amount of snow and ice pack, and then huge
Lodged where, sir? Lodged where? Where is the snowpack? Where was the snowpack? Where did it start?
Well, I would defer exactly. I focus on the Mississippi Valley, but you see it in the mountain regions, the northern Dakotas, and all. So the western regions has record amounts of snow and ice.
I haven't seen, maybe it exists, I don't know, but I saw the big chunks of ice, a picture, and I thought, so where did it come from? And where did it move? I haven't seen any good reporting on that. This is why I'm just communicating to you that we need to explain to people what's happening, and I haven't seen it meteorologically on the, on the television. So,
well, combined when you have record amounts of snow and ice, followed by extremely heavy rain events, what it does is it melts, and it causes that large formation to move down the waterways, which is exactly what you've seen. So the systems that exist out in the Missouri Basin are not like the ones in the lower Mississippi. And so, quite frankly, those levees were designed for lower levels of flooding on purpose. And so as this water and ice moves down, it inundates and it overcomes those particular levees. And that's what you've seen happen, is the system wasn't designed to take the load that came its way. If you look at the Mississippi River and Tributaries Program, that particular program has saved the American taxpayer $80 for every dollar we've invested in it. And so we're worried, as you see on the chart, that we'll have flooding later this spring. But we're confident right now that the system that's as it's designed is going to be able to handle that. I mean, it's a
Excuse me,
simplistic
sir,
version.
I'm not sure which chart you're talking about.
I think you don't have it in front of you, Chairwoman, but if you've seen the news where NOAA has predicted flooding and you believe you said it,
Again,
25% of the country.
It's a piece here, a piece there, a piece there. Who's got the whole piece? Who's got it all pasted together so we can explain what just happened?
I'll pitch in just a little bit on that. Where did it come from? The Missouri River runs all the way to Montana, actually western Montana. And so that comes through some very cold country, North and South Dakotas, and until it gets down to Nebraska and then into Iowa and Missouri. So as the temperatures warm, the snow melts, the ice breaks loose, and it starts down this river. And it causes flooding because it causes ice jams in certain areas. It holds back the water. Then, oh, by the way, what's happened this year, it rained at the same time in that area, that entire Midwest area, to contribute to that ice flooding, and which really hasn't hit yet. The snow melt and the ice flooding hasn't really hit yet. It's coming, but that's why they say the flood's not over. So most of this flood was from rainfall. So that comes down and it hits the Mississippi River at St. Louis. Then the Mississippi River flows from Lake Itasca, Minnesota, down to Cairo, Illinois. The Ohio River comes in at Cairo, Illinois, and joins the big river where the MRT project starts from Cairo to the Gulf of Mexico. And that's now, I will tell you this, as bad as the Missouri River is flooding, that flow is only about 30% of what the Ohio River flow can be during a flood. So when it comes past Cairo, Illinois, into the mainline Mississippi River, the lower Mississippi, there's about 30% coming out of the upper Miss and the Missouri and 70% out of the Ohio. And
We need to get you on TV, Mr. Secretary.
That's
the most complete explanation I have heard. How many people in the room would agree with me?
Ma'am, I lived that for 37 years. I ought to be able to. Maybe that'll make up for some of the things I didn't explain today. How's that?
Madam Chairwoman,
yes.
Would it be accurate to say, just like droughts, we can't really control those, but we can mitigate them by storage and other types of things? No matter what we do, we are never going to be able to control every flood that happens. Sometimes there's just too damn much water. But we've mitigated the effects of those to some degree. And some of them are going to be worse than others, and we've prevented flooding by the projects that we've had in some cases. So, I mean, you know, we're never going to be able to fix everything.
So the other important point, we know where there's certain areas we can't mitigate and people are still at risk. So then how do they get informed? How do local authorities know? Make it early, call the time to evacuate, all this. So it's not just structural things, it's how do you make sure you have the other systems in place so people that could be in harm's way get out of there.
And along that line, when you do your work plan and stuff, you have to take into consideration those things and what's the effects of the 500-year or 100-year flood versus the more immediate effects of something breaking and that kind of stuff. Those are the things you take into effect when you do a work plan.
We definitely do, sir.
And as you look at the damage that has occurred, what does it instruct you about the current way in which that part of the United States is retrofitted against?
So there's a lot of questions now, ma'am, about how did we run this back in 1937, and there was a certain way the river was able to meander. But then in an ability to be able to foster more economic value, we actually constrained, and the river couldn't move quite as wide as it used to. So we put it into a nice, neat channel with great big levees, and everybody had farmland on the side, If you look at this picture right here, 1934, that's what the river looked like. This is the Missouri River. And it might be hard to see, but look down on the lower left. That's the width of the river. Notice how the river kind of goes back and forth. I don't know exactly what that width is. That might be 2 or 3 miles wide. Then in 77, through a lot of different guidance from the administration and through Congress and through us, we said, let's discipline that. And you look at those vertical things, those are actually like wooden poles that were put down in through the fields. And what happens is when the water comes through that area, it slows down, the silt drops, and that's beautiful farmland. Those great big beautiful green areas right there are massive farmland. A lot of wheat is one of the best places to farm apparently in America. So the problem then is that at some given point, are we taking care of the habitat? The problem here is that there was a decision that was administered that the pallid sturgeon didn't do very well in that picture on the right. There was nowhere where they could off-ramp. Think about an interstate where you can pull off on a rest area. So we were instructed to go back into that area and make certain chutes, I'll call them. So a sturgeon could go into those areas and rest and be able to, continue to increase the habitat. So this goes back to this balance. Initially, you might have something that's very, very good for the river, but then we want to take care of the economy, then we take care of the sturgeon, and then where is that place where it's the optimal solution? And maybe some of that changes based on social norms and culture, because every single day things are continuing to change. But this goes back to right now, we're relooking this to say, what is that right balance, and how do we make sure that we're doing the right thing for the best interest of those variables? And I would say that the most important has to be life safety. We're worried about the economy, we're worried about habitat, but we can never put people in harm's way because those other things are perceived to be more important.
Very interesting you mentioned sturgeon, because we are just trying to restore them to Lake Erie right now. There's a big project underway, and I thank you. That's very, very interesting.
I didn't know we had sturgeon rest areas.
It's amazing what you find out when you dig deep, right? But I wanted to mention to the Secretary in general, as you're well aware, it's critical to the health of the Great Lakes that we keep invasive Asian bighead carp out of the lakes. If they get into the lakes, they will ruin fisheries that are worth billions of dollars. Lake Erie alone is over $7 billion annually and supports over 75,000 jobs. So this is a very massive challenge to us in our region, and I have a deep concern we aren't moving quickly enough. And that is why I, along with many of my Great Lakes colleagues, am anxiously awaiting the release of the Corps' Brandon Road Chief's report. I have 3 questions. When must the Chief's report be issued in order for Brandon Road to be eligible for Corps 2020 work plan funding for pre-construction engineering and design? Secondly, the Chief's report should include a recommendation that includes a robust suite of measures to effectively counter Asian carp at Brandon Road. Can you please update the subcommittee on the status of the Chief's report? And thirdly, it is particularly important that the final report narrow the contingency currently at 66% and potentially raising the proposed cost by hundreds of millions of dollars. The Corps must also communicate closely with Illinois as your non-federal partner about its letter of intent and sponsorship of the project. We need a report that can push the project forward after the Chief's report is issued. I would like to your commitment that you will brief Congress and the Great Lakes Task Force on next steps. And I might say parenthetically, I'm concerned that in 2019, the administration chose not to fund the Corps' work with the interagency task force and stakeholders to keep the carp out of the Great Lakes. The budget request again does not include the funding for the Corps involvement in this. And can you commit that you will work to ensure funding in the FY 2020 work plan?
Those real fast. We are on track right now to sign the Chief's report in April of 2019, so in the next 45 days. You have a very, very good point, though, that we normally need a non-federal sponsor. And we have seen change in attitude in the state of Illinois, where we want to try to bring them on board. So I think it's good that we use some degree of strategic patience, and I've directed General Kaiser, who just was testifying here, to go see the governor of Illinois. There's 3 things he's got to do. We've got to, first of all, make sure that we can find a way that Illinois is going to be a non-federal sponsor. We've got to work a little bit. There's a thing we got to do with a financial viability. They've got to be able to make sure they can show that they've got the financial assets to do it. And then there's also some policy things we got to work out. But once we get Illinois on as a non-federal sponsor, we want to sign that Chase report, posture it. We don't see a problem right now with the 2020 budget as far as being eligible, because we've got, I think, enough time to stay on track and continue to be aggressive. Even if we're delayed for a month or two, I still think we'll be postured to be able to come back into 2020. I would think personally, and our recommendation back to Mr. James, is that the ability to secure funding in the 2020 work plan for whatever we need to do for pre-engineering and design would compete very, very favorably, because we all know how important this is, and we've seen a lot of momentum in the last 3 or 4 months by everybody to say, let's get together, let's find a way of being able to get to where we can make this thing happen. So there's probably some other things that you might have asked that I didn't touch, but we're working hard on the non-federal sponsor, we're working hard on PED, we're working on potential work plan, and we want to do whatever we can to be able to set this up for success.
And I can't speak for Congressman Calvert, but he and I have had long discussions about fish out, which isn't necessarily your job, but some of the other related agencies, to try to figure out a way to diminish these populations. Right. Other places in the country have been able to remediate, get rid of the critters. And yes, put a bounty on them. And we really, any observations you have on that from your experience in other parts of the country would be very valuable to us, though that is not directly your job. Right now, Fish and Wildlife is contracting to do this with the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative.
Yeah, I'm sure there are scientists that know a lot more about this than I do, but they claim that below the electric barrier that's in the system now, preventing the fish from going up, not the new Brandon Road, but the one that's in there now, just below it, they are doing that extreme fishing or whatever you call it, and they're giving it a lot of credit for the fish not having moved upward. So that's not scientific, but it's what I've been told.
Yes.
If I could, Chairwoman, just real quickly, I know the Department of Interior, and with some of my notes, we've got in our budget of $107 million on invasives. And that's over with USGS, which is also under my review. We're doing a lot of work in this area with Asian carp and some of the other specific carp family components that are up in there. This eDNA that I think you've had some interaction with as well, of what USGS is doing, working side by side with Fish and Wildlife Service and in other parts of these agencies, is a critical part of trying to help you solve that Asian carp problem.
I just think that with the folks that exist down at the bottom of the Mississippi River, since they're raising a lot of catfish, why can't they find an economic use for these things and start fishing them out down there as well? So we sort of take it from the bottom and the top. Do you want to comment, Mr. Secretary?
Yes, ma'am. That's where they came from.
I know. That's why I want to put. I know, and so I'm saying, if there's an economic use, let them pay attention.
China has had several different facilities over here trying to capture them, clean them, and send them back. But there's one close to my hometown and back in Missouri. For some reason, it's just not working out. And surely it's economics. I think they're well liked in China, from what I understand. So.
Right. I've never understood that either, Mr. Secretary. Why we can't move the market faster.
They're very prolific. They take over.
Thank you. I have to speak for the Sulaks and my region of the country. Assistant Secretary James, the request proposes a sizable investment in the construction of this new Sioux. The General has talked about that as well. And I know, Mr. Secretary, that you've visited the Sulaks and you're well aware of the national security importance of the system. Could you provide us with an update on the status of the new Sulaks construction project? And I just want to say your commitment in the 2020 budget is a huge victory for the economic vitality of our region. Other members have spoken of it as well. And I'd appreciate any comments you wish to make to update us on this really vital project for our area and any roadblocks you might anticipate.
Yes, Chairwoman. I'll ask General Semonite to follow me up on details, but I can tell you his total commitment to Sioux Locks. I hope the funding comes as fast as I wish it to in future years. And I think it will, due to the strategic nature of where those locks and the strategic nature of what comes through those locks. So I think it's going to be a good luck story. It's like all the other things we do. If we just put enough money to it to do it, it costs half as much. I mean, really, put the money to it to what the general can actually execute and keep moving forward is my hope. General, can you?
Yeah, just a quick update, ma'am. So we put about $32 million of FY19 work plan into that. Michigan matched, they put about $52 million, so that's around 74, and the design's going on right now. Obviously, in the 20 budget, there's 75.3. So we think that there's adequate funding right now to keep us on schedule. And just to be able to give you a couple deliverables, we're right now getting ready to award the upstream channel deepening contract. That'll address the full scope of the required work. We're also working the design of the approach walls, and then we'll restart the design of the new lock chamber. So in other words, there are several different parts of this. We're taking it chunk by chunk, just as I talked about on CHICKAMAUGA. What would be logical type increments we can do, build it into the work plan to supplement the president's budget and be able to continue to keep this thing moving. But this has got dramatic ramifications to our country if this thing ever went down. The Department of Defense is worried about this. So we are very pleased to see this in the administration's budget, and whatever we can do through the work plan to continue to keep this on track, we want to be very aggressive here.
Thank you for your cooperation on this regard. The entire Steel Caucus, the bipartisan caucus, met this morning with several of the companies and so forth. There's a major hearing here, and this is all a part of America's story, so thank you very, very much. I wanted to go back and just have you reiterate with additional facts. If, in fact, the administration's budget as proposed were to decrease funding for both the Corps and the Bureau, what would you do? What would you have to do with your projects? What pain would that cause you inside of your respective agencies? How would you, General Semonite, recent press report stated that you said that the budget then would be enough to fund the agency's day-to-day operations. But what would be the impact on the Corps' projects if it were? And Assistant Secretary Petty or Commissioner Berman, what programs and activities would not be funded if your budget were cut by a third?
So, ma'am, there's a minimum CORE amount of work that has to be able to happen just to be able to keep things operational, to keep hydro going. We need guys on the hydro plants, the locks and dams, all this stuff to be able to keep America moving, keep like 90% of all of our goods coming through these this inland navigation system. The things that we wouldn't do is those that maybe we could end up delaying. So I hate to say Everglades restoration, but if we had to take a knee there for a while, if we had to do less ecosystem, if there's some other things that we are going to start and put on hold, I think also the backlog would get bigger. There are things that we'd end up putting, just as the Secretary said, put some more baling wire on and hold it for a little bit longer.
If I could, Madam Chair, so you're saying, I was going to ask this question, if this budget request is approved as is, your backlog maintenance goes up to $98 billion, most likely.
I would personally say yes.
Does the backlog maintenance of the Army, of the Bureau of Reclamation go up with a 38% cut to their budget?
Yeah, it would just have that longer term consequence that would come.
So all we're doing is just putting stuff off and risking things.
All right. I just wanted to say to those who've traveled a great distance to be here today in the audience, and obviously to our witnesses, thank you so very, very much for the effort you made to be here today. We really have a good subcommittee, and we work on a bipartisan basis. This is the way the country's supposed to work. So, you know, no national press is here. They're off somewhere else, right? But everything you do really matters to the people of this country and to our future. And you deserve more play. I'm trying to figure out a way to do that, to elevate you more, and to explain to people in ways they can understand why what you do is so important. So some of the graphics we've asked for, some of the mapping, some of the additional documentation so that the public can grasp something really complicated. You have someone to my right and to your left here, the ranking member who is had a real profession before coming here to Congress and is very technically and highly scientifically trained. You have members of this subcommittee who come from phenomenal backgrounds. This doesn't happen all the time. Yours truly spent many, many years of her life as a city and land planner and a regional planner. So the questions we ask somewhat reflect our own view of the world, and we believe we're in a position to really help the country by working together. So we've pushed you a little bit today on asking for ways that we can help inform our colleagues as well as the country, and I hope that you think about some of what we've requested and help us help the country. Oops, this tells me I have to be quiet. I'll call right back. So I just want to thank you very much for being here today. Our hearing will conclude. I want to thank everyone who has joined us and ask the witnesses to please ensure for the hearing record that questions for our record and any supporting information requested by the subcommittee are delivered in final form to us no later than 3 weeks from the time you receive them. And members who have additional questions for the record will have until the close of business on Friday to provide them to the subcommittee office. The hearing is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you, Marcy. Good hearing.
Thank you for what you contribute. Really, really amazing.
Yes, thank you.